The rain is coming down hard, sideways, pushing against the windows like it wants in. It's the night before Thanksgiving. The bank is almost closed, customers are tired, tellers are watching the clock. Then, the doors open. 3 people walk in, no shouting, no panic. Not yet. A man steps forward and places a black pistol on the counter, not pointed at anyone, just letting it be seen. I don't want any bait bills. I don't want any die packs. His voice is calm, controlled, like he's done this before. A teller is escorted to the vault. 2 others are told to lie down. The clock keeps ticking. 4 minutes pass. A duffel bag is filled, not with thousands, not with hundreds of dollars, but with over $1 million. And outside, traffic is thick. Rain-soaked headlights crawl through the streets. The doors close behind them. What no one inside the bank knows, what no one can even imagine yet, is that this moment is the final move in a streak that has stretched back more than 4 years. Through the same banks, the same streets, the same disguises, adding up dollar by dollar, robbery by robbery. By this time tomorrow, there will be gunfire. There will be a citywide manhunt. And there will be a body found in a backyard camper. Welcome to Cashed Out. I'm your host, Michael Dwyer, and tonight's story begins with the calmest robbery you've ever heard and ends in chaos. This is the Hollywood Heists. William Scott Scurlock was born in 1955 in Virginia, raised in a household built around structure, discipline, and moral certainty. His father was a Baptist minister, his mother an elementary school teacher, 2 professions rooted in rules, guidance, and responsibility. From the outside, it was the kind of upbringing meant to produce stability. Right and wrong were clearly defined. Expectations were firm. But even early on, Scurlock didn't respond to the boundaries the same way that others did. He wasn't confused by them, he simply didn't feel obligated to follow them. He was intelligent and socially adept, but directionless, resistant to authority, and uninterested in the traditional paths laid out in front of him. As he grew older, that resistance hardened into a pattern. Scurlock wasn't reckless in the way people expected criminals to be. He wasn't impulsive or explosive. Instead, he was calculating, observant, and deeply confident in his own intelligence. He could charm people easily, gain trust quickly, and bend situations into his favor. What he lacked wasn't awareness, it was restraint. Consequences didn't register emotionally. Rules existed, but only for people who accepted them. In the 1970s, Scurlock drifted away from Virginia and eventually landed in Hawaii. There, he found exactly what he was looking for: distance from structure and freedom from expectation. Life became looser, faster, and driven by experience rather than stability. Alongside his childhood best friend, Kevin Myers, he discovered how easy it was to make money selling marijuana. It wasn't violent, it didn't feel dangerous, it felt efficient. And that realization that money could be generated outside the system with relatively little risk, it stuck with him. For Scurlock, the drug trade wasn't about rebellion or desperation. It was about control. He learned quickly how supply worked, how demand could be exploited, and how rules could be bypassed if you were discreet and confident. Selling marijuana didn't feel like a crime. It felt like an optimization. And that mindset, treating illegal activity as a problem to be solved rather than a risk to be feared, would define everything that followed. Eventually, Scurlock returned to Washington State and enrolled at Evergreen State College in Olympia. Now, on the surface, it looked like an attempt at legitimacy, but in reality, it was another calculated move on his part. Evergreen's unconventional academic structure gave students broad freedom and access, particularly to laboratory facilities. Scurlock wasn't interested in earning a degree. He was interested in chemistry, more specifically, in learning how to manufacture crystal meth. Using Evergreen's labs, some stolen chemicals, and his growing technical knowledge, Scurlock quietly transitioned from small-scale drug involvement into full-scale production. By the 1980s, he had established himself as a major meth supplier in the Pacific Northwest. He wasn't flashy about it. He didn't advertise. He operated with precision, keeping his circle small and his methods controlled. His intelligence allowed him to stay ahead of competitors, while his calm demeanor helped him avoid drawing any attention. The money came quickly, and the money came steadily. And with it, Scurlock built a life that felt completely removed from consequence. He bought land and constructed a massive 3-story treehouse hidden deep among cedar trees. This wasn't a novelty structure or a weekend project. It was a full compound, complete with electricity, plumbing, fireplaces, and some hidden rooms. It blended into the forest so well it was nearly invisible from a distance. But inside, it was comfortable, it was secure, and it was deliberately isolated. It wasn't just a home. It was a retreat from the outside world. And as his wealth grew, Scurlock's relationship with money became increasingly abstract. He traveled constantly, he tipped extravagantly, and he gave cash away with very little thought. He distrusted institutions entirely, choosing not to rely on banks or systems he didn't control. But instead, he buried large sums of money on his property, cash, hidden in the ground. It felt safer to him than any vault. It was tangible, and it was his. And for years, the system worked. Scurlock lived freely, insulated by isolation, intelligence, and confidence. He believed he'd found the perfect balance, managing high reward with manageable risks. But the drug world has a way of collapsing. In 1990, Scurlock's primary distributor was murdered. The details mattered less than the message. The violence was sudden, irreversible, and out of his control. Up until that point, risk had been theoretical, something to plan around, something to manage. The murder, it shattered that illusion. The drug trade had become unpredictable, and unpredictability was the one thing that Scurlock couldn't tolerate. Here's the thing, for most people, the fear of prison pushes them away from drugs, but for Scurlock, it was the fear of chaos. The murder forced him to confront a truth he didn't want to acknowledge. The drug world didn't allow for a clean exit. It didn't reward intelligence forever. Eventually, it turned violent, it turned messy, it turned uncontrollable. Scurlock didn't want to be caught in someone else's war. He wanted to decide the terms of his own risk. So, he walked away from dealing. But walking away from drugs didn't mean walking away from the lifestyle. He still needed money, and more importantly, he still craved adrenaline. That sense of mastery, the quiet thrill of beating the system without being touched by it. Without drugs, his days grew restless. The isolation that once felt freeing began to feel confining. He needed something new, something that offered structure, predictability, and control. And that's when an old idea resurfaced. A bank robbery wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a fantasy he had carried since childhood. Because banks represented order, authority, and trust. They were the physical embodiment of the system Scurlock had spent his life skirting around. Now, to penetrate that system, to Walk in, take what he wanted, and walk out. It felt like the ultimate test of intelligence and nerve. And unlike drug dealing, bank robbery offered clean parameters, fixed locations, predictable routines, clear start and end points. With enough preparation, the variables could be controlled. And for someone like Scurlock, that was irresistible. And throughout the early 1990s, he wasn't acting out of desperation. He was planning, he was studying, he was rehearsing. He observed people closely, like how they responded to authority, how quickly fear spread, how calm could override panic. He understood that violence wasn't necessary if confidence was absolute. And if you moved with certainty, people followed instructions without questioning. And before his first robbery ever took place, Scurlock had already decided how he would operate. No chaos, no unnecessary harm, no emotional reactions. Everything would be deliberate. And once that line was crossed, there would be no going back. By the summer of 1992, the planning was complete. What followed was execution, and almost immediately a pattern emerged. The first heist occurred on June 25th, 1992, at the C First Bank branch in Seattle. Disguised with a prosthetic nose and heavy theatrical makeup, the robber entered the bank alongside Mark Biggins, who wore a rubber Ronald Reagan mask. The duo moved confidently through the lobby, barking orders to ensure compliance. In under 10 minutes, they left the building with $19,971, slipping back into the streets before the police could react. It was small, it was calculated, and it was perfect. Barely 2 months later, on August 14th, 1992, the same C First branch in Seattle was targeted again. But this time, the robber went in alone, brandishing a handgun and wielding the same take-charge method that had previously worked. $8,124.50 was taken, and once again, law enforcement was left scrambling. The pattern was forming: intimidation, rapid execution, and clean exits. The spree continued into September. On September 3rd, 1992, a U.S. bank branch in Seattle became the target. Using another disguise, the robber maintained his composed demeanor, controlling the room while cash was gathered. The robbery netted him $9,613. And just over a week later, on September 11th, the University Savings and Loan in Seattle lost $5,739 in another carefully orchestrated heist. Though smaller in amount, it reinforced the system's predictability and the robber's growing confidence. Now, October brought another escalation. On October 5th, 1992, the Great Western Bank in Seattle was hit. Through calm, assertive commands and swift execution, the robber walked away with $27,423, leaving bank employees stunned and authorities scrambling. Then came their first major score. November 19th, 1992, at the C First branch in Seattle. In a carefully timed heist, the robber entered, quickly subdued the tellers, and left with $252,000, the largest haul of the year. Witnesses described the calm, deliberate movements and the way he seemed to command the room, establishing a reputation that would eventually earn him the moniker Hollywood from law enforcement. And then it just went silent. The robbery stopped, at least until November 24th, 1993. And our favorite robber went to his favorite location, the C First branch in Seattle. Now, by now, the authorities were monitoring this branch closely, but he was still able to get away with $98,571. The routine was familiar, yet the robber's control over the situation remained unshakable. And in his time away, he brought on a third member to the team. Steve Myers, his outside lookout, and his job was to track police frequencies with the scanner, ensuring the escape route remained clear. Now, 1994, it saw a flurry of activity. On January 21st, a U.S. bank branch in Seattle lost $15,803. And less than a month later, on February 17th, Seafirst branch in Seattle was hit again, and this time for $114,000. Attempts outside Seattle were not always successful, though. A planned robbery at First Interstate Bank in Portland, Oregon on June 24, 1994 was aborted entirely. No money was taken, but he did learn lessons. And just as soon as those lessons were learned, his robbing spree resumed. On July 13th, a First Interstate Bank in Seattle was robbed, resulting in a haul of $111,796. And then, on December 20th, U.S. Bank in Portland, Oregon lost $22,000. These heists reinforced the bandit's confidence, and his notoriety grew among both the public and law enforcement. And that will bring us to 1995, and it began with a narrow miss. On January 18th, the First Interstate Bank in Seattle fell victim, but a dye pack exploded, forcing the robber to abandon the $11,924 he stole. Undeterred, he returned just 9 days later, on January 27th, to the Seafirst in Seattle, taking $252,466. These larger sums revealed a calculated ambition. Each robbery was not just about money, but about mastery of the craft. The robbers' methods became almost formulaic. Enter quietly, assert control, coerce tellers, avoid unnecessary violence, exit before police could respond, and stash the cash for later. With accomplices carefully placed, Biggins inside to manage the crowd, Myers outside to monitor law enforcement, he executed each heist with precision. And with each successful robbery, he grew more ambitious. On January 25th, the First Interstate branch in Seattle yielded $141,405 to them. Then, on May 22nd, that same First Interstate Bank in Seattle lost $114,978. The robbers' pattern was no longer just opportunistic. It was strategic, almost predictable. Investigators noticed patterns in amounts stolen, which allowed them to roughly predict when another heist might occur, but not where. Everything was building towards November 27th, a stormy Thanksgiving Eve. The Seafirst Bank in Seattle's Lake City became the stage for the largest and final robbery, $1.08 million. Inside, tellers were forced to lie on the floor while the robbers stuffed the vault's cash into duffel bags. Outside, a customer disobeyed orders, following the crew and providing a description of the getaway vehicle to 911. The pattern of precise, controlled robbery now collided with chaos. The escape devolved into a high-speed chase through Seattle streets. The crew switched vehicles from a blue Dodge Caravan to a white Chevrolet Astrovan. Flashlights and frantic searches for bait bills and dye packs illuminated the interior. Police pursued relentlessly. For the first time, shots were fired, both inside the van and from pursuing officers. Firearms, shotguns, rifles, and pistols, they all rang out. And eventually, the van crashed into a house. Inside the van, Biggins and Myers were wounded, but they were alive. Authorities discovered multiple firearms, police scanners, radios, and the $1.08 million they had just stolen. But you know what they didn't discover? The mastermind, because he vanished into the storm. The search continued overnight. Police scoured streets, canvassed homes, and deployed K-9 units, but the fugitive remained elusive. It wasn't until the following afternoon on Thanksgiving that two brothers spotted him inside an old camper in their mom's backyard. Police quickly surrounded the camper, and after attempts to elicit a response with a pepper bomb, one gunshot rang out from the inside. Now, when officers entered, they found the robber dead, a single self-inflicted gunshot to the head confirming the end of a 4.5-year spree that netted $2.3 million across 17 completed bank robberies. The rampage had ended, not with an arrest, but with a final act of control and self-determination. Evidence recovered from the scene and subsequent searches of his Olympia property revealed firearms, caches, travel plans, and a secret room filled with disguises and makeup, the tools of a meticulous, theatrical criminal mind. In the wake of the final heist, law enforcement moved quickly to dismantle the network that had enabled years of audacious robberies. Mark Biggins and Steve Myers were immediately taken into custody following their injuries in the van crash. Within days, they faced a barrage of charges: armed robbery, conspiracy, assault on federal officers, and use of firearms in the commission of a felony. The state charges were filed with Seattle District Court, while federal prosecutors simultaneously brought cases under the bank robbery statutes, creating overlapping legal pressures. Bail was set at $1 million each, underscoring the severity of their crimes and the high risk they posed if they were released. In federal court, both men eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts, including conspiracy and armed robbery, acknowledging their roles in a string of Seattle heists. The U.S. District Court moved decisively, sentencing Biggins and Myers to 21 years and 3 months in federal prison, in addition to 5 years of supervised release. Part of their sentence included mandatory consecutive time for the use of assault weapons when firing upon law enforcement, a total of 10 additional years. Prosecutors had sought even harsher penalties, up to 24 years, citing the calculated nature of the robberies and the danger posed to officers and civilians. But the judge opted for the lower end of the sentencing guidelines. Both men served their sentences in federal facilities far from Washington. Myers was incarcerated at Forest City Federal Correctional Institution in Arkansas and released in December 2013. Biggins served time in Inglewood Federal Correctional Institution in Colorado, gaining freedom in June 2015. Their releases marked the end of a long chapter of federal incarceration, but their legacy, the legacy of their crimes, continued to resonate in Seattle, where the memory of the Hollywood bandits loomed large in the public imagination. Meanwhile, the fallout extended beyond the robbers themselves. The families of those involved, particularly the Walkers, whose property had inadvertently become the final hiding place, found themselves entangled in the aftermath. Initially, when they sought the $50,000 reward offered by banks for information leading to the capture of the bandits, they were denied on a technicality. The family's efforts, coupled with public outrage and media coverage, ultimately pressured the banks to issue the full reward. In a brief ceremony, the Walkers received a $50,000 check from Seafirst and an additional $10,000 from a local financial institution, a gesture of recognition for putting themselves at risk during the manhunt. For authorities, the case became a blueprint for interagency collaboration. The Puget Sound Violent Crimes Task Force, a coalition of FBI agents, Seattle police detectives, and King County Sheriff's investigators, had tracked and analyzed patterns in the robberies over several years. From monitoring amounts stolen to predicting potential heist dates, the task force methodology evolved into a reference point for future investigations of serial methodical criminals. Even as Hollywood's life ended abruptly, the procedural innovations used to track and capture his accomplices influenced law enforcement approaches in the region for years to come. The impact of the robberies rippled through the Seattle banking community as well. Beyond financial loss, security protocols were re-examined with an emphasis on silent alarms, surveillance system, and coordination with local law enforcement. The Hollywood bandits' ability to evade capture for years highlighted vulnerabilities in existing security measures and underscored the need for proactive rather than reactive planning. Many banks adopted policies aimed not just at deterring crime, but at minimizing the risk to employees and customers during high-pressure situations. Even decades later, the story of the Hollywood bandit remained a cautionary tale and a point of fascination in Seattle and beyond. The combination of theatrical flair, meticulous planning, and audacious escapes set the case apart from ordinary criminal enterprises. For law enforcement, it was a reminder of both the ingenuity and unpredictability of criminal minds. For the public, it became a legend, a complex narrative of risk, reward, and the ultimate consequences of a life spent testing the limits of law. That's today's story on Cashed Out. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the podcast and leave a review, as it helps these stories reach more listeners. If you have a robbery case you want covered or a first-hand experience you're willing to share, please reach out to us at cashedout.truecrimepodcast@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Monday. Until next time, stay safe, protect your money, and remember, even the boldest plans can crumble in an instant.